What if I told you that the United States and Iran have come frighteningly close to full-scale war not once but multiple times? Not in theory, not in abstract diplomatic language. I mean moments when embassies were overrun, military rescue missions collapsed in the desert, warships exchanged fire in the Persian Gulf, missiles were launched, and world leaders had only minutes to decide whether the next step would be restraint or a regional catastrophe. For decades, the rivalry between Washington and Tehran has been one of the most dangerous fault lines in modern geopolitics, and at several points it seemed only one miscalculation away from exploding into something far bigger. So in this video, we are going to walk through 5 of the most intense moments in the history of U.S. Iran tensions. The kind of moments that tested presidents, rattled markets, terrified military planners, and made ordinary Americans wonder whether another major war was about to begin. And if you believe it matters to understand the moments that shaped America's role in the world, take a second to like this video and subscribe to American History Animated. Because studying history is not just about the past. It is also about understanding the weight of American decisions, American power, and American responsibility. To understand why these confrontations felt so explosive, you have to understand one basic truth. By the time the world was watching these crises unfold on television, trust between the two countries had already been deeply broken. But what made the following moments so dangerous was not just political hatred. It was the fact that in each case, leaders on both sides had to make decisions under pressure, with incomplete information, wounded pride, and the knowledge that one wrong move could ignite a war no one could fully control. The first truly explosive moment came in November 1979, when militants stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. 66 Americans were seized, and although some were later released, 52 were held for 444 days. This was more than a diplomatic incident. For the United States, it was a national trauma. Americans watched the crisis unfold night after night, and the image of U.S. diplomats held captive inside an embassy became a symbol of humiliation, weakness, and a new era of danger in the Middle East. For Iran's revolutionary leadership, the takeover was presented as a defiant rejection of American influence. For the United States, it was proof that the old order in Iran had collapsed and something far more hostile had taken its place. What made this moment so dangerous was that it locked both governments into a test of will. Washington could not simply ignore the seizure of its citizens. Tehran could not easily back down without appearing weak in the heat of its revolution. Every day the hostages remained captive. Public anger in the United States grew stronger. And every day the crisis continued, the possibility increased that America might choose a military solution. Even before bombs or missiles entered the story, this was already one of the most intense confrontations in the entire history of U.S.-Iran relations, because it poisoned the relationship for generations and taught both sides to see the other not as a rival, but as a threat. By April 1980, negotiations had stalled, frustration had peaked, and President Jimmy Carter approved one of the boldest rescue attempts in modern American history, Operation Eagle Claw. The mission was designed to send U.S. forces deep into Iran, rescue the hostages, and extract them safely. On paper, it was daring. In reality, it became a nightmare. Mechanical failures, bad weather, low visibility, and logistical chaos crippled the operation at Desert 1. Then came the catastrophe. During the withdrawal, a helicopter collided with a C-130 aircraft, and 8 American servicemen were killed. The mission collapsed before the rescue itself could even begin. This was a moment of maximum tension for a different reason. If the mission had succeeded, it might have reshaped the crisis overnight. But because it failed so publicly and so tragically, it deepened the sense of American vulnerability, while proving that the hostage crisis could now produce military death, not just diplomatic outrage. It also sent a message to Tehran that the United States was willing to risk direct action on Iranian soil. Imagine the pressure in Washington after that failure. American prestige was wounded, lives had been lost, and the hostages were still in captivity. That combination of humiliation, grief, and unresolved crisis made the situation even more combustible than before. The third moment came during the final phase of the Iran-Iraq War, when the Persian Gulf had become a dangerous battlefield for shipping, oil, and military power. In April 1988, after the USS Samuel B. Roberts struck a mine, the U.S. Navy launched Operation Praying Mantis against Iranian targets in the Gulf. This was no longer symbolic confrontation, and it was no longer limited to hostage diplomacy. American forces directly attacked Iranian military-related targets, and the clash escalated into open combat at sea. In other words, one of the greatest fears in U.S.-Iran relations had already happened. The two countries were shooting at each other. And as if that were not enough, the tension of 1988 only deepened a few months later, when the USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 655 on July 3rd, killing 290 civilians after the aircraft was mistaken for a fighter jet. In the United States, the event was described as a tragic accident. In Iran, many saw it as proof that America's military presence in the Gulf had become intolerably dangerous and potentially deliberate. This is what made 1988 such a terrifying chapter. Direct military confrontation had already occurred, civilians had died in a shocking disaster, and the possibility of an even wider war no longer felt hypothetical. It felt immediate. At this point in the video, I want to hear from you. Which of these moments do you think came closest to a full-scale U.S.-Iran war? The hostage crisis, the failed rescue in the desert, the Gulf clashes of 1988, the 2019 drone incident, or the Soleimani strike in 2020? Drop your answer in the comments and tell me why, because the most dangerous moment is not always the most obvious one. Fast forward to June 2019, and the world once again held its breath. Iran shot down a U.S. Global Hawk surveillance drone. Tehran said the aircraft had violated Iranian airspace. Washington said it had been flying in international airspace over the Strait of Hormuz. That difference was not just a legal argument, it was the difference between an act of defense and an act of aggression. And in the tense atmosphere of the Gulf, where oil routes, military deployments, and regional rivalries were already colliding, the incident suddenly created the possibility of immediate U.S. retaliation. What makes this one of the most dramatic moments in the entire story is what came next. President Trump later said that a retaliatory strike had been prepared and then stopped shortly before launch because of the expected loss of life. Think about how close that means both countries may have been. Not to angry speeches, not to another round of sanctions, to actual American strikes on Iranian targets. The drone itself had no pilot on board, but the political meaning of its destruction was enormous. In one flash, the world was reminded that in the U.S.-Iran confrontation, a single incident in the sky or at sea can move faster than diplomacy and force leaders to make life-and-death decisions in near real time. Then came January 2020, arguably the most openly dangerous U.S.-Iran confrontation in decades. On January 3rd, a U.S.-Iran airstrike in Baghdad killed Qassem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's Quds Force, and one of the most powerful figures in the Iranian system. This was not a proxy skirmish or a warning shot. This was the targeted killing of a top Iranian military leader by the United States. Around the world, the immediate question was simple and terrifying. How would Iran respond, and would the region now slide into war? Iran's answer came on January 8th, when it launched ballistic missiles at Iraqi bases hosting U.S. troops. There were no American deaths in the immediate strike, but there were dozens of injuries, and the significance of the event went far beyond the casualty count. For the first time in years, Iran had openly fired missiles at positions housing American forces in response to a major U.S. military action. This was direct, unmistakable state-to-state escalation, and yet somehow both sides stopped short of all-out war. That is exactly why this moment belongs on the list. It showed just how close the two countries could come to crossing the point of no return, and how fragile that line really was. When you step back and look at these 5 moments together, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The U.S.-Iran relationship has not been defined by one single crisis, but by recurring episodes in which mistrust, pride, military force, and political symbolism collide all at once. In 1979, the fight centered on hostages and revolution. In 1980, it moved into the desert with a failed rescue mission. In 1988, it exploded in the Gulf. In 2019, a drone brought the two sides to the edge again. And in 2020, the killing of Soleimani and the missile response showed the world just how quickly decades of hostility can turn into open confrontation. The uncomfortable truth is that history does not always move toward peace in a straight line. Sometimes it moves through standoffs, retaliations, misread intentions, and last-minute decisions that never make it fully into public memory. That is why these moments still matter. They reveal how fragile global stability can be when two determined states refuse to trust each other, and they remind us that some of the most important chapters in American history are not only about victories, elections, or speeches, but about the terrifying moments when war was close enough to feel real. So if you care about understanding the events that tested American resolve, shaped U.S. foreign policy, and revealed the real cost of geopolitical miscalculation, make sure to like this video and subscribe to American History Animated, because preserving historical memory is also part of honoring the seriousness of American citizenship. And before you go, I want your opinion. Which of these 5 moments do you believe was the single closest point to full-scale war between the United States and Iran, and do you think America handled it wisely? Tell me in the comments.